You very much for the nice introduction, and yeah, I have to confess two things at the beginning. So the first thing is I'm a philosopher. So as you told the audience, we're gonna change gears. So basically, what we bioethicists do is to it's a kind of conceptual research, I would say. So we do thought experiments, we look at arguments and stuff like that. And we are a normative discipline. So basically at the end, the outcome of our research is to have a normative answer to an ethical question. So it's not so much describing the world, like in the hard sciences. The second point I want to confess is that, well, I chose the title actually because I was put and assigned a talk in the fertility group. So yeah, CRISPR-Cas MRTs, mitochondrial replacement technologies, are related to reproductive technologies. But at the end of the day, the topic I was working on for a long time with my supervisor, Ignacio Mastroleo, who's unfortunately not here, he should be supposed to give the talk. The topic is actually innovation. So what's innovative technology and how should it be regulated and ethically analyzed? So we have previous work published on a topic of innovation related to precision medicine. I just want to mention that because Hans-Peter Gneigner, he's the editor of the book, gave me and Ignacio the possibility to publish. And then we worked a little bit on the Latin American context in another publication. Well, coming to more the reproductive technology side, so you may have heard about these examples. So the first example I present is the first gene-edited baby that was born last year. That was implemented as an embryo in a womb in November, and that was performed by this guy here, Dr. He Yang-Kui in China. And it was very contested. So basically, there were a lot of people crying out that that was not ethically acceptable. The second example is pretty much related to fertility and reproduction. So basically, that was a baby that was born in Mexico. The MRT, the mitochondrial replacement technology, was performed in Mexico. The baby was born in Jordan. It was a Jordan couple, and the woman had a mitochondrial disease. So basically what they did was maternal spindle transfer. I guess most of you know better than I what this is. So what they did basically was to fertilize the egg of the intended parents, and there was a donor egg offered by a donor, basically with healthy mitochondria. And what it did was to transfer the spindle apparatus of the fertilized egg into this donor egg with the healthy mitochondria. So that's why people think or say this baby has three parents somehow. Well, what's the problem with these issues? It's not really research because it's not declared as research. And one of the most problematic points about those things is basically that those countries like China and Mexico actually attracted scientists to perform such things because there are no regulations. So in the Mexican case with the MRT baby, it was clear that it was actually performed by John Sang. He was a guy working in the US, and he was really keen to do that in a couple. So basically, they looked for a country where the guidelines were not well regulated, and Mexico kind of offered them a place to build a clinic, a fertility clinic, where they could perform that. So the thing is, it's an issue about what's exactly this innovative technology, how is it regulated, and things. So just having a glance on the Mexican, or in general, you can say Latin American context. I just picked the example of Mexico because there's so much literature in that. So what you see, there is several laws regulating innovative technologies, but they don't really apply, and sometimes it's really blurred whether these innovations can be performed or not. So in Mexico, you have, for example, the law of biosecurity, but that regulates genetic modifications like the CRISPR-Cas. The problem here is that it's actually for agricultural problems, so it regulates the agricultural context. As far as embryos, human embryos are concerned, there's the General Health Act that says that research on assisted fertilization is only permitted when it solves sterility problems that cannot be solved otherwise. Some Mexican lawyers said, for example, that the MRT technology does not fall under this because the woman actually didn't have a fertility problem. She was fertile, but she would have had unhealthy babies. That's like the consequence. So they talk about this issue. Sorry. No. Okay. Just to mention two other things. That's of course the Vatican's instruction Dignitas Personae. That's not a guideline or something like that. But we have to admit also in the Latin American context that the Catholic Church has a big influence, and ethic codes from the Vatican influence the public deliberation on those topics. Not least to mention the American Convention on Human Rights, where embryos are characterized or defined as persons that have full rights to everything, to life, to be intact and stuff. Well, the claim of my co-authors' work and my work is basically that reproductive technologies, like any innovative technology, is innovation. Yeah? It's called clinical innovation as a concept. I come in a second to the concept, what it actually means. And second, the thing is, we claim from an ethical perspective, innovation and innovative technologies should be made subject to framework regulations of responsible innovation. So, in order to address this whole question, there are 4 questions that I take into consideration. So the first one is we need a definition for those innovative technologies or innovative care. Secondly, once we have a definition, once we can characterize it and say what this technology is, we can talk about whether it's ethically permissible, and if permissible, what are the guidelines and principles that should regulate it. And here in this talk, I wanted to add a little bit the Latin American context because it's quite interesting for innovation and innovative technology. So the basic question is innovation or innovative technologies research or practice? Practice means standard care delivered to patients in hospitals. Research, as you may know, means that an intervention is tested within a clinical context with research subjects. Usually, every country has like a regulatory agency. The US has the Food and Drug Administration that kind of regulates what research is and how it should be performed. It's quite strict, so patient subjects have to undergo informed consent. There has to be a risk-benefit profile, etc. Practice is not that well regulated. So, the Belmont Report is one of the most important research ethics guidelines that exist nowadays to regulate the ethics of research. And they make the distinction between research that undergoes regulation and practice that does not undergo regulation. So, in order to answer the question, is innovation research or practice, we may think, okay, it may be something like pharmaceutical innovation, which at the end is research, yeah? So this morning we had this fantastic talk about the splicing topics, so basically how we come from basic research to the clinical development of a drug, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally, at the end of the day, drugs are approved and administered to patients, right? So that's a linear model of research. So what we argue is that innovation is not research, because you start here. You start with the patient need. So basically there was a woman, she wanted to have a child, etc. And then you go back and look what can be done, what's developed so far, in order, what has preclinical evidence in order to help this person. So that's why we think we should stick to innovation as practice, yeah, patient-centered thing, and not research. We're not gonna pursue the research-centered perspective. So our definition of innovation is new non-validated practice. What it means, what this means, I'm gonna show now. New or novelty means there's a new use or indication of something, an intervention or a technology. And this technology, this newness, should show a significant change in the benefit-harm profile. Otherwise, it would be a mere change, right? So for example, if you perform a surgery and you use gloves, if you change the color of the glove, it's not innovation. If you change the material, for example, it can be a significant change. Then, non-validation. So, meaning that something is innovative and not validated doesn't mean there's no evidence at all. It just says that there's not enough evidence to be standard practice, right? So there's kind of this continuum from no data to full improvement, and somewhere in the middle there's innovation. Usually, most bioethicists say that innovation is only acceptable if it's in an exceptional healthcare context. So you cannot just apply unapproved treatments and technologies to anyone, right? There must be a strong reason behind it. So usually those patients have no other alternative, and that's why you try something new, because they literally would not have another possibility to pursue their health aim. We should also mention that the preclinical evidence should show a reasonable chance of success, that the technology or the intervention works. Otherwise, it would not be reasonable to apply it. So far, innovation is a conjunction of novelty and non-validation, but that applies to research as well. So the last characteristic, as I said, is innovation is practice. So what's like, it's quite tricky sometimes to decide whether something is research or practice. So the idea of the Belmont report, this guideline paper, is indeed that practice is the intention to benefit the patient. But it doesn't mean that data and knowledge is not developed. You can perfectly test something in one patient for the benefit of the patient, but at the same time you evaluate whether the innovation works or not. Research, in contrast, comes from the idea to generate data, and you may benefit the patient or the research subject, but only as a secondary aim. So I should say here, before I come to the next slide, that's actually very important. You may think, okay, this distinction doesn't, well, it's nice, but it doesn't have a great impact, but it has a huge impact, because those innovative technologies that I presented, like MRTs or CRISPR-Cas, were applied as practice. So there's a strategy to circumvent and sidestep sound research that underlies regulation by building clinics that are for the patients, for the benefit of patients, declared as practice, what generates something like medical tourism worldwide, where people go to dubious clinics, get treatments, etc. So it's a huge difference to say whether innovation is research or practice. What my co-author and I want to do, we want to offer a neutral definition of innovation, so we don't take a stance of whether it's good or not. I think the ethical point or evaluation is on the level of whether innovation is irresponsible or responsible. Yeah, whether the physicians care about ethical principles when they do it or not. Results of innovations can always be successful and unsuccessful. We don't know it because there's preclinical evidence. It's perfectly possible that innovative care leads to a bad result in a patient, right? So yeah, what we want to achieve is, of course, responsible innovation that is successful, right? On the morality side, yeah, when is innovation responsible? So I think there is several issues that have to be addressed when we want to answer the question. So the first issue is that research should not be crowded out. What do I mean by that? So as I said, there's a strong incentive to sidestep research and do something like innovative care, right? So what's the idea then? If everyone does innovative care, so patient-centered application, you don't have sound research, you don't get sound knowledge out of those patients. So you need research trials. So that's related actually to this point. So there must be a responsible transition to tests of innovation in individual patients to something like a research study. So you may see, like, after 3 patients, 4 patients that successfully get treatment, you design a clinical study. That's the idea here. A very important point is the patient under protection, because nowadays, practice is not well regulated. Patients are not protected in the same way as research subjects enrolled in studies. And here, at the end, you need an appropriate balance between the individual patient's health and sound scientific population health care. So, at the end of the day, coming back to the fertility topic and innovative technologies that are related to that, I don't know where to put this, but I'm pretty sure that it was responsible what these physicians did. Usually you can think that they are profit-driven somehow, or they want their reputation to be the first. The Chinese case of the CRISPR-Cas embryo is just ethically not acceptable because there was no public deliberation on the issue. There's a lot of deliberation needed and guidelines in order to perform something like that, if we ever want to have gene-edited babies. Last point, in particular in Latin America, there are a lot of problems associated with innovative technologies and care. On the one hand, because they're dominant conservative voices, it doesn't need to be bad, but the discussion usually revolves around the status of the embryo, etc. That makes it a little bit particular in this context. Medical tourism, so Mexico was just one example, but there are also medical tourists in Argentina, for example, that come here to get stem cell treatments, where no guidelines, no research ethics committee looks at what they are actually doing. That's a big issue. And in a lot of Latin American countries, the equitable access to new unvalidated practices. So in Mexico, for example, you don't have a universal health coverage. So there's a justice issue, who can actually access those technologies and interventions. But I don't solve these problems right now. I want to thank you. And also thank you for the audience, it's really brilliant. And yeah, my institutional acknowledgements are also dedicated not only to the bioethics program in Flaxo, Argentina, and CONICET, but also to the Biotherash Foundation. Because Roland Miltesmann founded an institute together with my PhD director just last year. It's an institute that is directed and related to philosophy of translational medicine. Okay, thank you.